Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
For almost 8 years now, I've been managing this condo building in New York City. I know every pipe, every valve, every quirk of the heating and cooling system. The building has central air conditioning and heating, which sounds convenient until you understand the catch. Once we switch the system from cooling to heating mode for the winter, that's it. We're locked in. No going back to air conditioning until spring, no matter what the weather does. New York City has this law that says buildings have to provide heat starting October 1st. Makes sense on paper. Problem is, October weather in this city is completely unpredictable. You might get a week of chilly days in early October, then suddenly it's 75 degrees and sunny for 10 days straight. If we turn the heat on too early and then get a warm spell, residents are stuck sweltering in their apartments with no way to cool down. So for years, we had this understanding with the residents. We'd wait until we got a real cold stretch, usually mid-October, before flipping that switch. Sure, people might be a little chilly for a day or two in early October, but they could throw on a sweater, way better than being trapped in an overheated apartment for a week and a half with no relief. Everyone was fine with this arrangement. We'd explain it at every annual meeting and people got it. They appreciated that we were looking out for their comfort over the long haul. Then last year happened. It was around the middle of October. We'd had some cool days, nothing extreme, but the board president decided she'd had enough. I'm talking about Karen, this woman who'd been on the board for 3 years and president for 1. She lived in a corner unit that didn't get great sun exposure, so her place ran cooler than most of the building. I got an email from her on a Tuesday morning, not a polite request, not a question about our timeline, a demand. She wrote that the temperature in her unit was unacceptable and ordered me to turn on the heating system immediately. She made it clear that she didn't care if it made other units too warm. She pointed out that she was a board president and should be comfortable in her own home. She declared that going forward the heat would be turned on by October 1st every year with no exceptions. She ended by saying this was not up for discussion. I tried to explain the situation to her. I sent back a detailed email about how the system works, how we can switch back once we commit to heating, how the weather forecast showed warm days coming. I reminded her that this had been our policy for years with no complaints. She responded quickly, and her message was even more forceful. She said she didn't care about the forecast and didn't care about other units. She stated that October 1st was a law and demanded that the heat be on by October 1st from now on. She ended by saying that was final. My boss told me to just do what she wanted. He said to pick my battles, so we turned on the heat. And sure enough, 3 days later, the temperature shot up to 78 degrees. My phone didn't stop ringing for a week. Residents were furious. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't open their windows wide enough to make a difference. Some units on the sunny side of the building were hitting 85 degrees inside. Every single person who called, I told them the same thing. I explained that the board president had ordered us to turn on the heat early and that this was the new policy going forward. I suggested they take it up at the annual meeting. Flash forward to this year. October 1st rolled around and I remembered Karen's email very clearly. She'd said heat on by October 1st. She'd said that was final. So that's exactly what we did. We switched the system over right on schedule, just like she demanded. The weather was gorgeous. Mid-70s, sunny, perfect fall days. And the building was a furnace. The annual meeting was scheduled for mid-October, and I knew it was going to be ugly. I came prepared. I brought my laptop and made sure I had access to all the email correspondence from the previous year. My boss gave me permission to handle this however I needed to. The meeting room was packed. Way more people than usual showed up, and I could feel the anger in the air before anyone even started talking. The treasurer gave his report, the secretary read the minutes, and then they opened the floor for resident questions. The first person stood up and asked why we had turned the heat on so early this year. He said it had been miserable and that the old system had worked fine. He wanted to know what had changed. Before I could answer, Karen jumped in. She declared that this was clearly a management failure. She claimed that the building manager had been making poor decisions without consulting the board. She said they needed to seriously reconsider our management contract. She turned to me with this smug look on her face. She asked if I would like to explain to everyone why I had decided to turn on the heat during a heat wave. This was my moment. I looked at my boss. He nodded. I told her that I would love to explain. I asked if I could use the projector. I didn't wait for an answer. I plugged in my laptop and pulled up Karen's email from last year. Her own words right there on the screen for everyone to see. I read it out loud word for word. The demand. The dismissal of other residents' comfort. The declaration that she should be comfortable and everyone else could deal with it. The room went dead silent. I looked at Karen. All the color had drained from her face. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in the 8 years I'd known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The resident who had asked the original question stood up again. He wanted clarification. He asked if she had ordered this and was now blaming management for following her orders. Other people started piling on. Karen tried to sputter out some excuse. She claimed she didn't remember and suggested I was taking things out of context. But the email was right there, crystal clear, her exact words demanding exactly what we had done. Someone else pointed out that she had specifically said she didn't care about anyone else's comfort. Another person asked how she could blame me for doing exactly what she had ordered. A third resident said this was exactly why they needed new leadership on the board. When the board election happened at the end of the meeting, Karen lost her position by a landslide. The new president came up to me afterward and shook my hand. She thanked me for finally calling Karen out on her behavior. She said everyone had been waiting for someone to stand up to her for years. 2 weeks later, we got the official notice. Our management contract was renewed for 5 more years. I'm 22 and just graduated from college last year. I moved to the city for my first real job, and the rent here is brutal. I couldn't afford a place on my own, so I found a roommate through a mutual friend. She seemed nice enough when we first met, responsible even. She had a steady job at a retail store and talked about how excited she was to finally have her own place. From the very first month, things started falling apart. I come home to find we were out of toilet paper, and she'd just shrug and say she forgot to pick some up. Then it was dish soap, then laundry detergent. I started keeping a mental tally of everything I was buying for the apartment, and it became clear pretty quickly that she wasn't contributing anything beyond her half of the rent, and even that was a struggle sometimes. The dishes situation was even worse. She'd use every single plate and bowl we owned, leave them in the sink for days, and then act surprised when I asked her to clean them. The trash would overflow because she never took it out. I'd text her reminders about the utilities being due, and she'd promise to send me her half. But then I'd have to follow up 3 or 4 times before she actually paid. We were friends at first, or at least friendly. We'd watch movies together and chat about our days. But after months of feeling like her mother instead of her roommate, I got tired of being nice about it. I started being more direct, maybe even a bit short with her. The friendship faded pretty fast after that. Our year-long lease ended in April, and we went month to month after that. Neither of us had made plans to move, so we just kept going. Then she got a boyfriend. Suddenly, she was never home. She'd spend every night at his parents' house, and I'd go days without seeing her. At first, I didn't mind. The apartment was cleaner, quieter. But then May rolled around. Rent was due on the 5th, and I hadn't seen her in about 2 weeks. I sent her a text asking when she'd pay her share. Nothing came back. I waited a day and tried calling. The call went straight to voicemail. I called again the next day. Still nothing. By the 3rd, I was starting to panic. I couldn't cover the full rent on my own, not without dipping into my savings in a major way. I ended up reaching out to her mom, whose number I had from when we first moved in together. Her mom promised she'd talk to her daughter and get back to me. Finally, on the 4th, I got a text from my roommate saying she was staying with her boyfriend's family for now and didn't think she should have to pay rent for somewhere she wasn't staying. I stared at my phone, then texted back asking if that meant she was moving out and when she planned to get her stuff. No response came. I had no choice but to pay the full rent myself. It completely wiped out what I'd been saving for a vacation that summer. I was furious. Over the next 2 months, I texted her constantly asking her to move her things out. I told her she needed to come get her stuff and that if she wasn't living here, I needed to know so I could find a new roommate. I asked her to please respond because I needed to know what her plans were. I mentioned that her mom said she'd take care of this and asked when she was coming. Nothing. Her mom kept telling me her daughter would handle it soon, but soon never came. By the time July started, I was done waiting. I asked a couple of friends to help me pack up everything in her room. We boxed up anything that looked valuable or sentimental and stored it in her closet. The rest, all the clothes and random stuff, we donated to Goodwill and the Salvation Army. I also called the landlord and asked him to change the locks. He agreed and took her name off the lease completely. Then, a few days ago, she showed up. I heard banging on the door and opened it to find her standing there. She demanded to know why her keys didn't work. I told her it was because she didn't live here anymore and didn't pay rent. She asked what I was talking about and insisted she never said she was moving out, that she was just staying with her boyfriend for a while. I explained that she'd disappeared for 3 months and refused to pay rent or respond to any of my messages and that she was off the lease now. I told her this was my apartment. She protested that she couldn't just be kicked out like that and that she lived here. I corrected her and said no, she didn't, that she stopped living here when she stopped paying rent and ignored me for months. She started crying big heaving sobs. She said the situation with her boyfriend didn't work out and that she was planning to come back. She told me she had nowhere else to go. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. I'd given her so many chances. Through her tears, she asked if she could at least get her stuff because she needed clean clothes and a shower. I told her I'd donated most of it, explaining that I'd told her in June that if she didn't make arrangements, by July I'd start getting rid of things. I mentioned that I kept anything that looked important in her closet. Her face went pale. She asked me what I'd done. I repeated that I couldn't keep storing all her things indefinitely and that I was sorry, but she'd had months to deal with this. She screamed that she was calling the police and that I had no right to do what I did. She was yelling now, her face blotchy and wet with tears. She cried out that I'd even donated her dead grandmother's wedding dress that had been in a special box. My stomach dropped. I apologized and told her I didn't know, and that if she had just responded to me, any of this could have been avoided. She kept screaming threats about lawyers and police, but eventually she left. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hand shaking. Part of me felt terrible about the dress, but another part of me was just exhausted. I tried everything to get her to communicate with me, and she'd ignored every single attempt. The next morning, my landlord called. He said he'd heard my old roommate stop by the night before. I confirmed that she had and that she was pretty upset. He told me she'd tried to file a complaint with him, but he'd told her that under state law the unit was considered abandoned once she vacated and owed rent. He assured me I'd given her more than enough notice and that I was in the clear. Later that day I got a text from her mom saying her daughter was devastated, but that she wanted me to know this was on her daughter. She explained that she'd told her repeatedly to deal with her things, and that she didn't listen. She apologized that I had to go through all this. I didn't respond. I just hoped this was finally over. I love skydiving, and what began like a one-time thrill turned into a passion. I got certified, joined a club, and made it a regular weekend activity. It was the one thing that made me feel truly free. That day was supposed to be routine. My instructor and I had done this jump dozens of times before. The weather looked clear, the wind readings were within acceptable range, and we were scheduled to land in the usual spot, a wide open field about 15 miles outside of town. Private property owned by a guy who loved skydivers and let us use his land every weekend. Everything went perfectly at first. The jump itself was beautiful. The freefall was exhilarating, and I pulled my chute right on time. But then things started going wrong. A sudden gust of wind hit me harder than expected. I tried to steer back on course, but another crosswind pushed me further off track. I could see the landing field getting smaller in the distance, and panic started setting in. My instructor's voice crackled through the radio. He told me to stay calm and try to aim for any open space I could find. He warned me not to fight the wind too much or I would destabilize. I did my best, but the wind had other plans. I was drifting toward a residential area, and there was nothing I could do about it. Houses started getting closer. I pulled on my toggles, trying to slow my descent and find the biggest open space possible. I spotted a yard that looked decent-sized and aimed for it, but I was coming in way too fast and at a bad angle. The landing was brutal. My right leg hit the ground first and I felt something snap immediately. The pain was instant and overwhelming. I crumpled onto the grass, my parachute collapsing around me. I tried to move but couldn't. My leg was definitely broken, maybe in more than one place. I lay there gasping, trying to reach for my radio to call for help. Then I heard a door slam open. A woman came storming toward me, middle-aged, wild-eyed, wearing a bathrobe, and she was carrying a baseball bat. She demanded to know what the hell I thought I was doing on her property. I looked up at her and tried to explain that I needed help. I told her my leg was broken and that there had been an accident. She yelled that this was no accident and that I had destroyed her lawn. She pointed at the mess I had made. I was lying there in agony, clearly injured, and she was worried about her lawn. I begged her to please just call for help and explained that I couldn't move my leg. She said she was calling the cops because I was trespassing. She raised the bat, and for a second I thought she was just trying to intimidate me. Then she swung it down, hitting my shoulder. The pain exploded through my body. I screamed at her to stop and asked what she was doing. She hit me again, this time catching my ribs. I tried to roll away, but my broken leg made it impossible. Each movement sent waves of agony through my body. She kept screaming at me to get off her property and yelling that I had ruined everything. She was completely unhinged now. She raised the bat for another swing when suddenly someone tackled her from the side. An emergency medical technician in uniform wrestled the bat away from her. He ordered her to step back right now. Another paramedic rushed to my side immediately. He told me not to move and said they were here to help. He asked me where I was hurt. I told him my right leg was broken. I also explained that the woman had hit me with the bat and that my shoulder and ribs were injured too. More emergency personnel arrived within seconds. Someone must have seen me coming down and called it in right away. They formed a barrier between me and the woman, who was still screaming about her property. She yelled that I had fallen into her yard and that I was trespassing. She demanded that they arrest me. One of the emergency medical technicians told her that I was seriously injured and needed medical attention. He said she needed to calm down and step away. She shouted that this was her property and that she had rights. They began treating my leg, and the pain was excruciating. They cut away part of my jumpsuit to assess the damage. One of them radioed for an ambulance while another carefully stabilized my leg. I could see the bone was definitely broken, the angle all wrong. Within minutes, they had me on a stretcher. When they were loading me up, police cars arrived. 2 officers got out and approached the scene. One of them started talking to the emergency personnel while the other approached the woman. The officer told her that he needed her to explain what happened. She told him that a criminal had fallen into her yard and destroyed her property. She said she wanted me arrested. The officer explained that this appeared to be a skydiving accident and that I was seriously injured. She said she didn't care and that I had no right to land there. She also complained that these people had invaded her property without permission. The officer began to say that emergency personnel have the right to provide medical assistance and that he needed her to calm down, but she cut him off. She actually shoved the officer, just pushed him with both hands. The officer stumbled back, clearly shocked. He told her not to touch him. She said not to tell her what to do and reminded him that this was her property. She tried to push past him, apparently trying to get to me on the stretcher. The officer grabbed her arm to restrain her, and she started swinging. She actually threw a punch at him. That was it. Within seconds, she was face down on the ground with handcuffs being secured around her wrists. She screamed about police brutality and yelled that everyone there was a witness. She claimed she was the victim. When the ambulance doors closed, I could still hear her shouting. The paramedic next to me just shook his head. He said some people were just crazy and told me not to worry about her. He promised they would get me fixed up. I later learned she was charged with assault with a deadly weapon for the bat attack, assault on a police officer, and a few other things. My leg required surgery and 3 months of physical therapy. Her lawyer tried to claim she was defending her property, but between the emergency personnel testimonies and the fact that she attacked a police officer, it didn't go well for her. My Uncle David had been a neurosurgeon for 15 years when he finally hit his breaking point. After one particularly brutal year of endless surgeries and sleepless hospital nights, he decided he needed a break. Not just any break, something exciting that would get his adrenaline pumping in a completely different way than operating on people's brains. That's when he found this package deal in Finland. 5 days driving McLaren supercars on frozen lakes. The 720S and the Artura to be exact. Absolute beasts of machines, he called them. Uncle David already owned 2 McLarens back home, so he knew exactly what he was signing up for. The power, the speed, the raw thrill of controlling something that powerful. It was exactly what he needed. Or so he thought. The first 3 days apparently went amazingly well. He spent them drifting these incredible machines across the ice, feeling them slide and catch, learning how to handle all that horsepower on a surface with almost no grip. He texted me photos. The cars looked spectacular against the white landscape. He seemed genuinely happy for the first time in months. The package also included a snowmobile excursion through the forest. Uncle David didn't think much of it at first. After driving McLarens on ice, how exciting could a snowmobile possibly be? But he'd signed up anyway since it came with a package. On the day of the snowmobile ride, he met his guide in the early evening just as the sun had started setting. Snow-covered trees everywhere with an orange sky behind them. The photos he sent before the ride looked beautiful. The guide gave him a basic rundown of the controls, showed him where the throttle and brake were, explained how to lean into turns. Standard stuff apparently. Uncle David told me later he'd just nodded along, eager to get moving. He asked the guide how fast these things could go. The guide explained they'd be going at a safe speed for the trail conditions since it was a guided tour through the forest. Uncle David pressed him about whether they could go faster. The guide explained that for safety reasons on this trail, they kept it moderate. They started out, and according to my uncle, it felt painfully slow. Here he was crawling through the forest when he'd spent the last 3 days pushing McLarens to their limits. After about 15 minutes, he couldn't take it anymore. He complained that it felt boring and asked if they could go faster, insisting he could handle it. The guide responded that the trail had some tricky turns ahead and they needed to maintain the speed for safety. Uncle David argued back that he'd been driving supercars on ice for 3 days, and surely he could handle a snowmobile going a bit faster. He practically begged the guide to let him open it up a little. The guide hesitated, then stopped. He came over to my uncle's snowmobile and adjusted something on the controls. He told Uncle David he'd changed the driving mode so he'd have access to more speed, but warned him to be careful because the turns came up fast, especially in the low light. My uncle thanked him, and for a while, he told me, it felt perfect. The speed, the cold air rushing past, the trees whipping by, this was what he'd been looking for. The adrenaline rush he'd been chasing all week. Then he came around a bend and there was a sharp turn. He saw it. He knew he needed to slow down, but his glove had bunched up funny inside his grip. When he went to hit the brake, he hit the throttle instead. The snowmobile lurched forward. He panicked, squeezed harder, and the machine shot straight off the trail, directly into a tree. The impact happened instantly. 1 second he was moving, the next he was lying on the ground, with pain shooting through his leg and arm. I got a call from the hospital that night. My heart dropped when I saw Finland on the caller ID. In the ambulance, the McLaren representative who'd come to check on him asked what happened. Uncle David explained that his glove had bunched up and he hit the throttle instead of the brake. He called it a stupid mistake on his part. At the hospital, the doctor examining his broken arm and leg asked the same question. He told him it was his fault that he'd gone for the brake but hit the throttle instead. He admitted it was just a dumb error on his part. He even texted the McLaren team that night from his hospital bed telling them not to worry, that things happen. He asked if he owed them a snowmobile or any other costs. He made it clear it was his error and his responsibility. I was relieved he was okay. Relatively speaking, A broken arm and leg seemed manageable compared to what could have happened. But then the bills started coming. Medical expenses, transportation back home, physical therapy, months off work. And you can't exactly perform brain surgery with one working hand, so the lost income kept mounting. The more time passed, the more Uncle David's story started to change. He began talking about how the guide should have given him more thorough instructions, how he shouldn't have unlocked that extra speed mode, how he didn't adequately describe the trail or warn him about that turn. The more he discussed it with his lawyer, the more convinced he became that there was negligence here, not on his part, but on theirs. So he filed a lawsuit, £14 million. When he told me, I didn't know what to say. I reminded him about the texts he'd sent taking responsibility, but he brushed it off. He said his lawyer felt confident they had a strong case. The trial was several months later. I attended to support him, though I had a sinking feeling about how this would go. Uncle David laid out everything: the insufficient instructions, the guide enabling higher speeds without proper warning, the inadequate trail description. His lawyer presented it all professionally and thoroughly. Then their lawyer stood up and started talking about my uncle's McLarens, his jet skis, how he'd specifically asked for more speed. They called him an adrenaline junkie. I watched Uncle David object to that characterization. He insisted he was a highly trained medical professional, not some reckless thrill seeker. The judge looked at him for a long moment, then spoke. He asked my uncle to confirm that he owned 2 McLaren supercars, which he noted were some of the most powerful vehicles on the planet. Uncle David started to answer yes, but the judge cut him off. He pointed out that my uncle had paid for an experience driving McLaren supercars on ice, that he enjoyed jet skis, and that he'd specifically requested to go faster at night through a forest trail. He said that adrenaline could not have been irrelevant to his decisions. The judge continued saying that Uncle David had wanted more speed and should have understood that being guided at higher speed would be more challenging and risky. He said he considered that my uncle did understand this, then he dismissed the claim entirely. I sat there watching my uncle's face as the courtroom emptied. All those months of preparation, all those legal fees, and now nothing. We walked out of that courthouse together, his lawyer apologizing beside him. I could see the realization washing over him. He'd just made a complete fool of himself on public record. Then the story made the news. His colleagues saw it. His patients saw it. The neurosurgeon who crashed a snowmobile and tried to sue for £14 million when he'd literally texted them taking responsibility right after it happened. Uncle David had wanted an adrenaline rush. He got one, just not the kind he'd been looking for. I still love him, of course. He's family. But I haven't let him forget it, and I'm pretty sure his friends at the hospital never will either. My new job was mostly administrative at first, but I paid attention to everything. I learned how marketing campaigns were structured, how budgets worked, how client relationships were maintained. Within 6 months, my supervisor started giving me more responsibility. By 18 months, I was leading full campaigns with budgets ranging from $15,000 to $75,000. My reviews were solid, clients requested to work with me again, and my team trusted my judgment. Then my direct manager got promoted to senior manager. They brought in someone new to fill his position. The new manager came from another agency with about 8 years of experience. On his first day, he seemed friendly enough. He shook everyone's hand and said he'd heard great things about our department. When he got to me, he mentioned that people had praised my project management skills. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. But then I started noticing something. During team meetings, he'd single me out with questions about my projects. Not normal questions either. He'd ask about specific metrics or details that nobody could reasonably have memorized. The first time he asked me about the exact click-through rate from a campaign I'd run 2 months earlier. I gave him an approximate number, but something about it felt off. The second time we were in a meeting with the director of our division. My manager suddenly asked me to explain a budget breakdown down to specific allocation percentages. I stumbled over a couple of numbers. He smiled and said maybe I should keep better track of those details. I felt humiliated. After that meeting, I checked my records. The numbers I'd given were actually correct. Over the next few months, it kept happening. Always in meetings with higher-ups present, always questions designed to make me look unprepared. My colleague mentioned it one day at lunch. She said she'd seen managers do this before. They target someone competent and try to make them look bad to elevate themselves. I started preparing differently for meetings. I bring printed reports, have my laptop ready, memorize key figures. But he'd always find something I didn't have immediately available, and he never actually looked at the materials I sent him. Every Friday I'd email him detailed updates on all my active projects. These reports took me about 2 hours to compile. He'd respond within minutes with a thumbs up emoji or just thanks. No questions, no feedback, nothing that showed he'd actually read them. Then in meetings he'd act like I never communicated anything. He'd say things like, "I'm not clear on where we stand with this account." It made me look like I wasn't keeping him informed. One time, after he said he didn't know the status of a major campaign, I showed him the 3 updates I'd sent that week. He looked at his phone and said he must have missed those. No apology, no acknowledgement. This went on for 6 months. Then came the quarterly review meeting. All the department heads met with the director and vice president to review performance. These meetings usually lasted about 2 hours. I'd been dreading it because I knew my manager would try something. He'd been particularly smug that morning. The meeting started at 9 a.m. About an hour in, my manager shifted in his seat. He said he wanted to dive deeper into one of our major accounts, the Mitchell campaign. This was our biggest active project, worth about $90,000. It had been running for 5 months with another 4 months to go. My manager said he wanted full transparency about the metrics and performance. Then he turned to me. He asked me to give the room a comprehensive update, current engagement rates, conversion metrics, budget allocation, timeline for deliverables. He wanted specific numbers. The campaign had dozens of moving parts, multiple platforms, email marketing, paid advertising, content creation. There was no way anyone could recite all that from memory. He was setting me up to fail in front of the most important people in the company. The director was watching me. The vice president had put down his phone. My manager leaned back in his chair with this satisfied expression. But what he didn't know was that I'd sent him a comprehensive report on the Mitchell campaign 5 days earlier. 23 pages of detailed analysis. I'd spent hours compiling it. I'd emailed it to him Wednesday morning at 8:15 a.m. He'd responded at 8:17 a.m. with a thumbs up emoji. I knew he hadn't opened it, so I smiled. I said I actually had the complete updated report with me. I pulled my laptop out and connected it to the conference room projector. Within seconds, my screen appeared on the wall. The title page showed the date I'd created it and the date I'd sent it. Wednesday, 5 days ago. I explained that I'd sent this update to my manager earlier that week. I offered to walk everyone through the key findings. My manager's expression changed immediately. He sat forward in his chair and looked at his phone, but I was already moving through the slides. I showed them that engagement rates had increased 18% compared to the previous quarter. Conversion metrics were exceeding our projections by 12%. We generated 437 qualified leads and 92 had converted to sales. Budget tracking showed we were $7,200 under our allocated budget. I showed them the client feedback. Their satisfaction rating was 9 out of 10, and they'd indicated interest in extending the contract. I presented the timeline for the next 4 months and explained our strategy for the final phase. The whole presentation took about 12 minutes. My manager sat there getting increasingly uncomfortable. His face went from normal to pink to red. He kept checking his phone, clearly searching for my email and realizing he'd never opened it. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the director spoke. He said that was extremely thorough. He looked at my manager and said it seemed like he should have read the email more carefully before putting me on the spot. A few people chuckled quietly. Everyone understood what had just happened. The vice president said my work was excellent, and this was exactly the kind of detailed reporting they needed to see. He looked pointedly at my manager when he said updates needed to be reviewed. People started asking me real questions about the campaign. My manager didn't say a word. He just sat there looking deflated. When the meeting ended around 11:15 a.m., people came up to me. The director congratulated me on the results. The vice president shook my hand. My manager left the conference room quickly without talking to anyone. Over the next few days, word spread around the office about what happened. I gained a reputation as someone who couldn't be rattled under pressure. My manager's behavior changed completely after that. He never tried to ambush me in meetings again. 6 months later, I got promoted to senior project manager with a raise to $56,000. The promotion came with a recommendation from the director who'd witnessed everything. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.